Hey now, and welcome to episode 48 of the Help Find the Others podcast. If you've been here all along, well then welcome back. But if this is your first time listening to us, well welcome. I'm your host, Ruben. And Stan is on the line too. How you doing? Did I do?
Doing great. How about you?
Doing great, man. Yeah, so this episode was with Wyly, who was referred to us from our previous episode with Joel. And Joel and Wyly are working together on a nonprofit organization, VeteransofWarorg. And I thought, I really love their goal and what they're going to achieve with this nonprofit. But I also just really like talking to Wyly. I think he was a great guest. Don't you agree?
Yeah, great communicator. Perfect guy for making the changes that we want to see out there for ayahuasca and other psychedelics. You love seeing that he's on the front lines of making these changes and communicating the ideas to people that maybe aren't going to experience it themselves.
Yeah. Talking to Wyly and to Joel, knowing that this organization is in the hands of these two, that they're so good at telling their story and making you feel the power of the medicine that they're trying to promote and get out there. And they are definitely a treasure of the psychedelic revolution going on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode with Wyly. But yeah, thanks, Wyly, for coming on. A couple episodes ago, we had Joel from Australia on, and if no one's listened to that episode, I really recommend it. And he put me in contact with you because now you two are working together, running the nonprofit organization Veterans of War, correct?
Right. Yeah, that's an organization that I started in 2015, and we did a major pivot in April of last year to what we're currently doing. So the entire nonprofit went from saving and preserving veteran stories of service, sacrifice, and transition to preventing veteran suicide.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing that we're living in a time where that we're starting to come out of the shadows, but and you're very, when we've talked, you're very much cognizant of the language you use and not calling plant medicine drugs and sticking to the medicine. So I like how your organization is really saying, focused on this is medicine that is treatment for this condition and bringing that to light. I think it's an amazing time to live in, and I'm glad there's people like you out there setting up organizations like that to help change that stigma.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate the sentiment. But the grim reality of the situation is that we're losing in the veteran community 20 of our brothers and sisters in arms every single day across America. And if you unpack that a bit, that's about 600 veterans a month and about 7,000 veterans a year, which is either equal to or just above the amount of people that we've lost in 19 years of continuous war. And the difference being is now we're losing these men and women to a completely preventable outcome. And our response as a nation needs to change because what we've been doing up until this point simply isn't working.
Yeah. It's a problem that, if you don't know anyone in your family or friends that are in the military and suffering from it, it's very easy to look at it as like well, it's not my problem, or, there's so many of those things that you can kind of ignore if it's not touching you personally. But this is a case where, say people can say what they want about war and the reasons we go to war and all that, but the people that actually go to war, the veterans that are coming home, they did that for us, for the country, like there is honor in that position, whether or not you agree with why they had to go there in the first place. And that makes it even more sad that it's a problem that can get discredited as not being not mattering and not being your problem. If you're a standard American citizen, that has nothing to do with the military. But it's part of what's going to happen going forward, to help, like I said, with the stigma of plant medicine at the very least, and that it's a very real problem that there's a very real cause for.
I think in the end, I think that this is all about framework. And it's really easy to say, for example, post traumatic stress is a veteran problem and it doesn't affect me. But can you say, for example, postpartum depression doesn't affect me or end of life care doesn't affect me? Do you know somebody that's had to deal with cancer or with a terminal illness? Do you know anybody that's had a baby? Because what I would really reframe it as is a safe and effective modality to combat trauma, because that's really what entheogens are. Um, Trauma doesn't know age, race, gender, creed, nationality. Trauma is part of the human condition. And as such, I think that the real travesty is that here we are in the year 2020, and we're looking at ancient solutions such as ibogaine or ayahuasca or psilocybin, that literally have been a part of indigenous culture for millennia. And yet, the first part of almost any one of my outreach calls is simply educating the person I'm talking to that these solutions exist. And as we talk about that, is in my head, like I said earlier, the grim reality that, that clock is ticking, and every day I'm losing 20 brothers or sisters to an absolutely preventable outcome that we have effective solutions for. But due to a stigma in place, most people aren't comfortable to even talk about those solutions, let alone approach them. And then if you find the people that do have both the wherewithal and the ability to approach them, how do they find a place that's both safe and at the same time has their best interests in mind?
What's currently being done by the VA or wherever you'd go to help treat this?
So the VA has several treatments that are currently, I think, on their docket. They EMDR, they use group therapy, they use individual therapy, but by and large, the largest, I think, method for them to sort of pacify the population is prescribing them antidepressants and pain relievers and sleep aids. And those, if you're a veteran, you can get by the handful. This feeds into not just the opioid addiction, not just the suicide rate, but overall to this mentality that rather than fix the trauma at the root, we're going to put a band aid on it. I was told flat out from the VA in 2009 that this was just my new reality. This was something I was going to have to learn to deal with. And I thank God every day that I didn't take that answer and really believe it. I wasn't satisfied with it. And one of the things that ends up happening when you have such a I guess, progressive from the Western standpoint view on how to treat these traumas is that the people that actually seek you out invariably out of desperation, which makes sense because that's how I found ayahuasca in the first place. Was I was desperate for a real solution because I knew if I continued going the way that I was going to be a statistic.
Well, it's funny that you say it's being progressive in the Western world, but as you mentioned earlier, it's more like just going back.
It
you
is to
know,
our roots, to common sense like solutions for trauma that have existed alongside humanity since anything that we would call humanity has existed. And again, it's frustrating because it's such a travesty. We're like I said, we're talking today, and how many people could have benefited from this if in 2008 or 2009
yeah.
um, this had been an accepted healing modality from the VA. If they said, "Hey, we can give you pills that will pacify or that will cover up these um, different expressions of trauma, such as insomnia, hypervigilance." That's the other thing about PTSD. It's a catch-all word. It covers so many different expressions of internal trauma that in some ways it's a bit useless. Um, but you got to have a word. You got to have something that at least ties together an idea of people struggling to reconnect and meaningfully come home.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, and you know, um, you mentioned that the suicide, result of PTSD for veterans, but much like PTSD, the term PTSD is a catch-all. The symptoms and the end result of that PTSD doesn't always end up in suicide for these veterans too. I mean, there
Right.
can be, destruction of their home life, alcoholism, loss of job, not being able to be
Homelessness is
employed,
huge.
homelessness, and all of that is all symptoms of PTSD, and a lot of that, much like the VA would say, um, this is your new reality. Like our culture says that too, of like,
Yeah.
well, you're homeless and you're just blaming being a veteran, but you're not trying hard enough or whatever. Like there can be that kind of response from society as well.
You can't will your way out of a mental and a physical, a very really a real physical experience. And what I mean by that is some of the hallmarks of PTSD. The science would suggest that there is now an imbalance in the brains of veterans that have undergone these intense traumas in the hippocampus area of your brain that governs the fight or flight response. And what ends up happening is that inside of your brain, instead of having a moment where it decides should I be on or should I be off, it's just constantly on. And so all of these expressions of it, like I said earlier, the insomnia, the hypervigilance, the suicidal thoughts and ideations, the breakdown of personal relationships, these are all really just reactions to a hyperactive fight or flight response. And
Yeah.
then when you couple that with other real traumas in the veteran community, like, for example, loss of limb, loss of mobility, um, you know, I feel to this day very, very grateful that all I can say is that I have PTSD and tinnitus, right? Like my ears don't work so well and my brain can be a little crazy. I
Mhm.
know guys, there's a man I know that's in the veteran sector that was hit. He was very close to an IED when it exploded, and it literally he lived through it, but it blew his eyes out of his face.
Oh my God.
And when he went home to his wife stuck by him for a couple of months, and then laid on him, "I can't be married to a monster," and left him.
Jeez.
And I this is one of the strongest people I've ever met in my life. I don't for even a second, be sad for. I mean, be sad for that experience, sure, but don't put pity on him. He's a very incredible man. But he took his wedding ring and he took the diamonds out of it. And when he had his false eyes made, he put the diamonds as the cornea of each of his eyes. So
Oh wow.
man, when you see him, not only is that a testament to like, holy crap, this guy is like continuing forward, but wow, he was not satisfied to just live in that trauma. And you meet people like that, and it really, for me, like I said, it humbles me and it makes me realize just how lucky I am to even be able to have a conversation like this, to be able to like interface with my computer the same way most people do. Because that's not a reality for people that are missing limbs. That's not a reality for people that are really dealing with some of like for example the traumatic brain injuries um, that can change your entire life immediately. I have a friend that has no short-term memory. He's basically the guy from Memento, and what that means is he's got two small children, and his wife has had to like stay at home and be his full-time caretaker. And she told me a story about at one point he's at home with their kids and she had to run to the store to pick up food. And when she came back, their 2-year-old daughter was just in the bath by herself. And he's downstairs, like cooking food on the stove. And she says, "Oh my God, our daughter's upstairs in the bath." And he's like, "Oh, I know, I'm just cooking some food." And then she's like, "Our daughter is upstairs in the bath." And he's like, "Oh my God." It took like a whole other person to like walk in and let him know that this was an inappropriate situation. And then when they went upstairs and took care of their daughter, he left the fire on the stove. So they come back down and they got a smoky house because I mean literally his brain isn't working correctly anymore. He would get lost going to the market. Like he would go to the store and then have to call his wife, which he has on speed dial because he doesn't remember her number, and say, "I don't know where I'm at. You're going to have to find me." Um, I don't have that reality,
Yeah.
but I think that these entheogenic medicines offer a path to recovery for people that are really suffering on the fringes that otherwise wouldn't even be available.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and it also comes down to like, I think one reason, the stigma is changing is like take a guy like that. Even even if he used entheogens to try to better that situation or, help his brain kind of heal a little bit and it doesn't work, I think we're starting to be like, well, what's the harm in him at least trying, like that kind of thing. And I think, that's kind of changing in our culture of like maybe even if people don't believe that the medicine actually works, I think we're starting to be like, have empathy
Don't
for
we at
for
least
people.
have the responsibility to try?
Right. Yeah.
Don't we at least have, I mean, the dignity to give these guys a chance and gals? I use guys as the non-gendered form here.
Yeah.
Um, it's just a really interesting situation that we find ourselves in as a society. We have a rampant mental health crisis in America, and I speak to veterans because that's my tribe. That's who I know. I'm one of them. But I very clearly understand that this narrative that I'm helping to craft is a very important for changing the dialogue in the country. I mean, if you had told me 20 years ago that cannabis would be legalized or looking at legalization in most states, and maybe even on the federal level, depending on who comes in power, I would have thought you were crazy. But largely due to the efforts of, cancer patients and veterans, this dialogue has changed nationwide.
Hmm.
We're a very sympathetic vehicle for changing that narrative. And
Yeah.
I think that what it comes down to is exactly what you said. There's this feeling that, we went out for you guys. Like, whether we understood the weight of our rifles or not, we still picked up those rifles.
Yeah.
And ultimately, how are you going to deny a person like that the ability to come home? Because that's really all they want. That's all any of us want is to come back and to be a part of society again, to feel like we're needed, to feel like uh, what we did was, for something greater, because we believed in democracy, because we believed in protecting our families and our homes. How can you tell that person, you don't have the right to have access to something that could change that and fix that for you?
Yeah. Um, let me ask you one question. Uh, so my grandfather was on the beaches of Normandy, like on that invasion. Like um he never really talked about it. He got a
The
Purple
silent
Heart.
warriors.
Yeah, we knew like he got hurt on the beach. He hurt his hand and almost had to have it amputated. Um, and like so he would tell us that story, but we didn't really know much about his war experience. And when Saving Private Ryan came out, and the first scene where they're in the
Did he
boats and like
cry?
the yeah, well he that's exactly what he went through. He was on those boats,
Right.
uh, and my grandma and him were in the movie, and in that first scene it was too powerful and he got up and had to leave,
Yeah.
and he immediately booked a trip to go over there to like he had never been back,
Right. Yeah.
and did all the tours and stuff like that, and then found out some other stories of like a guy that died in his arms, and like they had promised to find each other's wives and tell him they loved him, and he couldn't find his wife, and I mean this stuff just started
A
pouring out of him.
lifetime of heartbreak that
Yeah.
he's held inside.
um
Like,
but what I was getting at is like those veterans from World War II and stuff like that seem to like our culture definitely is like, oh, thank you so much. Like they seem to be more grateful for that generation of veterans, and then not as grateful for more modern veterans from the Middle East wars. um
that's a really nuanced situation. So I can speak to that, I think, rather clearly. I think that The first thing is the amount of people that were involved in World War II and World War I versus the amount of people that are involved in our wars. And there was a draft. I mean, just case in point,
Yeah.
basically 1 in 4 active-bodied people went to war at that. Well, active-bodied men at that point went to war, um, and now the numbers are in an all-voluntary force. It's less than 1/10 of 1%. So whereas before everyone knew somebody that had left, everyone was affected by it's either your brother, your father, your cousin, your boyfriend, your friend's friend. Everybody knew somebody. Now it's at the point where the only way that you're really plugged in to what's happening is if a family member has gone, or you've gone personally, and that number is, like I said, a 1/10 of 1% of the overall population in the United States. Um, about around 3 million, I think, alive veterans is the number right now. And I got to be honest with you, we have it much much better than Vietnam or Korea, which I frequently call the forgotten generation, because those guys, they actively had a negative response when they came home. People were spitting on their faces and calling them baby killers. Um, I can't even imagine. And you look at the suicide rate in that generation, and it absolutely reflects that trauma.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it was a lot harder in World War One to pretend like it didn't affect you. And I think that as the wars continued, as we, every couple decades or decade or so, we got into a new conflict, the amount of people that were, actively involved from your communities became less and less, um, culminating in where we're at now, where it's really like, again, less than 1/10 of 1%.
Yeah.
That's an astronomically low number.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about 330 million people in the United States, it ends up being quite a large number.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I guess as, you know, there became more media coverage too, and misinformation and information from other sides and stuff like that. It's a lot easier to be opposed to war, I guess, than back in the World War II days. Um, and I think that's the thing, because even myself, I'm can be very anti-war and anti military industrial complex, and rant about that very often. However, I never equate that to any of the people actually fighting the battles. That it just sucks that, like, that can be a cultural, like, view of it, though, that like you said, the
Let me give
Vietnam
you an
guys.
interesting point from the side. So I served in Afghanistan. I was a staff NCO, staff sergeant of Marines, and I was the logistics chief for an artillery battery. And to give you an idea of what kind of operations we ran, we were in the southern Helmand Valley, in a battle called the Battle of Garmsir. And Garmsir is a small city. I think it's also known as Darvashan in Arabic. I'm not sure which one's more appropriate, whether we should use the Arabic or the indigenous Pashtun name. But regardless, it's about 50 kilometers north of the border with South Waziristan, which is where we found bin Laden, for example. So it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. It's where 90% of the poppy is cultivated in the entire planet. And what I was a part of was something called the Spring Offensive. And that's when the Taliban would come down out of the mountains and protect the poppy crops that funded their wars. So what we would do is send our guys in to interdict them, to stop that, and at that time burn the crops, which is really short sighted because the people growing the crops are farmers. They're subsistence farmers, and they rely on those crops to feed their family year round. And they have what's called a harvest credit system in place where the Taliban pays them a year in advance for the entire crop, and then it damn well better be there when they come to collect. Because if it's not, they kill everyone. They kill your family. They kill everyone involved. So it's really hard to, you burn somebody's crops, you've made a whole lot of enemies, not just the Taliban. But what I'm getting to is, I was very clearly in a combat zone, But being in artillery, I don't have a combat action ribbon. So when I came home, one of my best friends said, were you in combat? And I kind of had to think about it for a minute. And I was like, well, I guess not. I didn't run and shoot somebody with my rifle. I didn't have to get hand to hand. And he's like, well, how bad could it have been?
Yeah.
um, it's really weird the way that we look at that. And the reality of my unit was we had constant, for a solid month, continuous operations, meaning that we were firing one of the 155 millimeter howitzers with high explosive artillery rounds with a kill radius of just about a football field, um, every 10 seconds for a month straight. Um, and in direct support of infantry directly below us. We were on a plateau, and the infantry was engaging the enemy below us, and we were direct artillery support. But I was never in combat, according to the military.
Yeah.
Despite that,
Yeah.
not that I ever wanted to be in combat, but you have to understand, in the veteran community, having that ribbon, it allows you access to a host of new benefits that you don't get otherwise. For example, I can't transfer my GI Bill to my kids. If I were to die of some random illness because I lived on a burn pit for a couple of months, my benefits basically die with me. And it's a whole host of things that come, all these tiny little innocuous choices that you don't even get to make, that affect your overall livelihood going forward. Um, it, it, the situation, I think, that many veterans come back to because of how it works to be in the military is, you have to understand that you're given orders, and you do your orders. You do whatever they say. So if they had told me to attack a building, be part of a stack and kick a door in, I would have done that. And that's the same whether you're somebody from the air wing that is an aircraft mechanic, or if you're infantry. You do what you're told. So it baffles me that some people in my generation think that they haven't done enough. I think there's a large portion of veterans that were part of the logistics chain, or were part of the outside security, or any of the other jobs that you have to do to make a military unit work, that not only come back with all of these traumas and after effects and unseen scars of war, but on top of that, they feel like what they did wasn't enough. So one of the things that I really want to say to any veteran listening, um, remind yourself, you already were part of that 1/10 of 1% that put their life and their name on that line, and what you've done already sets you aside from more than 99.9% of Americans. It was enough, and if you'd been given the order to do whatever, you would have done it, just like every other military member promises to do when they sign that line.
Yeah. Well, and and I mean, it's terrible that someone would ever try to say that to someone, like, like you said, it's not that bad, you weren't in combat, where it's like,
That's my best
um,
friend, mind you. Imagine what
yeah,
other people are
yeah,
thinking
yeah,
that have no
and it's
idea.
like, it doesn't take combat to be traumatic. Like,
Oh
just
no.
just being on edge and knowing that at any time someone could ambush your, while you're sleeping, or anything like that. Like your head's always on a swivel, like that a prolonged period of that, whether or not there was any combat that took place, would be a traumatic experience, and you know rattle your nerves for a long lasting time.
Yeah, for many people, your life. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I think, I try to have this talk with civilians. They ask how bad was it, and I try to say, I don't know that it was, nothing was something that I couldn't handle, because clearly I'm here, right, and we're having this conversation. But ultimately, it changed the way that I experience life fundamentally. If you're in a place where, let's say you go to a concert and it's incredibly, incredibly loud, and you're standing right next to the speaker. And so for, the full 4 hours of that concert, you're hearing music louder than you've ever heard it in your life. As soon as you walk out of the club, your ears are ringing. People trying to talk to you around you have to really pay attention to even hear them, because the music was so, so loud that now trying to hear the nuances of soft music becomes nearly impossible. And that's kind of how it was for me coming back from Afghanistan. I went from a place where at times, we had active mortar teams zeroing in on our position. We were mortared several times, whether I was in Kandahar or actually forward in Helmand Valley. And then when you come home and you get a Verizon bill that's like 2 months late, it's like, so a spreadsheet is angry at me? That's what I'm supposed to be reacting to right now? Like an automated caller is angry at me? Because
Yeah.
that has no bearing on life as you've defined it anymore.
Yeah, man. It's I think let's switch
Let's hop
and
back. Yeah, let's talk
it,
about
yeah,
how I
let's
got
let
here.
well actually let's talk about what Veterans of War, what's the structure of what you are actually, other than advocacy, what are you providing for veterans? Like what's the structure of?
So, Veterans of War is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we connect teams of veterans to guided ayahuasca therapy designed to heal the scars of war. And we do that by offering 6-month fellowships. Um, these fellowships are designed with a curriculum that supports veteran teams utilizing all three American Psychological Association approved methods to combat the after effects of war, namely psychotherapy, psychopharmacology, and education or support. So the first 2 months of the fellowship is designed around creating a unit mindset in the veterans participating and providing those veterans with education and preparation training with a guided psychotherapist or psychedelic integration coach. And then um, the workshop itself, which right now is in Peru due to legality of ayahuasca in the United States. There's a 14-day workshop in Iquitos, Peru, and we pay for that, Veterans of War. And the veterans will have 4 opportunities to actually partake of ayahuasca in a ceremonial setting. And then once the workshop itself is complete, veterans return to their homes of record, and another 4 months of fellowship continues, where every 2 weeks we have guided calls with the entire unit and the coach that are designed around integration of lessons learned and support of changes that have been made through the process itself. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help veterans reconnect to their inner warrior, find a new sense of purpose, and to come to terms with the trauma that they have experienced so that it doesn't hinder them anymore. It doesn't rule them and instead becomes something that can serve their journey. Um, we work to build healthy life connections that sustain permanent growth.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome. And how many fellowships at a time can you handle?
So we send the fellowship itself, like I said, is designed as a unit. So we send units, which are 4 veterans each. The coach and myself all go on that journey together. So there's 6 people total. But the actual fellowship itself, we affectionately call them fire teams because that's sort of the smallest unit of um, cohesion and leadership in the military, and it represents a 4-man team that is all there to support each other and support each person's individual growth by providing a platform that supports the unit's growth.
That's awesome. And so uh there's like a application process
Yeah,
through the
so if they
website.
go to VeteransofWar.org, I've done my team and I have put a lot of work into making sure that the entire process is laid out in a way that's easy to understand, and also that the risks and all of the applicable research are codified and expressed in a way that they can read it. And then once they get through that, um, that those pages, they are led to the application itself, which is fairly um, robust. And it's designed to basically ensure that the quality and character of the people that are accepted as participants um, are those kind of people that have already tried other avenues and are looking for something that maybe is a little bit outside the box, but ultimately that they have the mindset that they're not going to accept this reality and they're going to do whatever it takes to heal themselves, because that's kind of what ayahuasca represents. I work really hard to ensure that the participants know that this isn't a magic potion or a silver bullet. Ayahuasca represents hard work. It can tell you, it can help you see the things in your life that are holding you back or that are affecting your decision making or the way that you're encountering life. But what it's really going to do is highlight the things that you're doing wrong. And it's completely up to the participant to do the work necessary in order to actually heal.
I really admire the structure that you set up with the 4-person units, because I see the work being done by maps, and a lot of it is, one-on-one, like meaning one, a doctor or psychotherapist and the patient. But I think having that unit to bounce back off of, if you choose to, you can create lifelong friends that are also part of your integration process for life.
That's the
That
idea.
bond is extreme. Yeah.
So, it's not a revelation to say that bonds are formed in shared experience. The more traumatic the
Hmm.
experience that's shared, typically the stronger the bond that's created. But I think that the reason that, we've built it this way is threefold. The first is that I truly believe that healing happens in community. I don't think that, I think it's possible to find healing individually, but just as you had said, there's just for being a human, there's a component of us that is very tribal, that absolutely looks to find who is like me. And when you feel like no one's like you, I think that's one of the fundamental reasons that people end up committing suicide, is because they don't think anyone else can understand what they've gone through. Um, and the second part of it, I kind of hit on there, is that we are tribal by nature. I think that we this medicine began as part of a tribal or a familial approach to healing, approach to connection. And ultimately, I think the final reason why it has strength is because those bonds themselves end up being the support structure. Like, no matter what I build into this program, what's going to be incredibly powerful and significant for the veterans going through it is seeing the struggles of the other veterans on their left and right that are going through it, and knowing that they have people that will fundamentally understand them. We started this conversation talking about how, the first part of most of my outreach calls is educating someone. Well, imagine that you don't have to do that part. You can call up your friend, or like I can call up my best friend, and rather than him say it must not have been so bad, he can say, "Man, I remember. That's tough. This is how I did it. This is how I got through it." I think there's a lot more strength in that, in having that support structure, intrinsically built in, rather than any sort of false dichotomy between myself and, for example, a therapist, which is only working as long as you pay him, right?
Yeah.
I want to have bonds that are built because there is a responsibility to your fellow man or woman, that you see yourself in their journeys and you want to help them overcome the trauma that you're dealing with or that you have dealt with. I
Yeah.
think that's a meaningful way and this speaks back to not being satisfied with band-aids anymore. We need a real tool for recovery. And if we really are being honest and we really want these people to recover, we need to provide support structures that actually help the growth of that recovery.
Yeah. Well, and the squad or fire team approach to it creates like a accountability group going forward. Like you said, that it's not a magic potion, and you need to put in the work, and integration is a ever evolving process coming out of that. And um let alone the support group, if you feel that you need to be you're being held accountable by the other people that went through it with you, you're more likely to put in that work.
Yeah, and the Fireteam fellowship idea, it plays directly into the military that they've left. I can
Yeah.
say where I'll always be a Marine. I Before my last deployment, I was what we would call a lifer. Like I had made it. I was a staff sergeant in 7 years. I don't say that to toot my own horn. I just say that as I could have never gotten promoted again and stayed in for 20 years. Um, I was perfectly successful to do that. Um, People told me when I got out that I was crazy. They were like, "Why are you already made it? Why are you getting out?" Um, and I think the part of me that speaks to that loss of identity and camaraderie, um, I think that the fire team structure builds right into. We this fellowship is more than just the work we do; it's the symbols we create as well. It's the new identity, the shared purpose, the shared perspective that we are all getting on board with. And I think that that's also a huge component to the loss of life in the veteran community. Who am I now? I remember coming home and thinking to myself, that very friend that I had the conversation with, I remember asking him, like, how are you going to introduce me to people now? I'm not like your Marine friend. Who am I now? I'm just like some guy. What does that even mean? Um, and so I want to pay back a little bit into that identity. I want the men and women that go through the program to be able to wear the badge of a fellow with honor and with pride, because it does represent work. It's not just given.
No, it's great, man. I really I love that. Like I said, that you're doing stuff like that for people. I mean, it's just so necessary, you know. Um, what what is? I know you said you have a lengthy story of what led you up to this, but what was your coming home and knowing you had to deal with PTSD? What was your like entrance into the plant medicine world, and that led you to understanding that that you needed to set up a organization like this?
Well, it took me several years. I got out in 2008, in late 2008, and it took me several years to really understand that I had a real problem. Um, It took the dissolution of my former marriage, the loss of most of my friends, and it got really dark for me for a while. On paper, I looked fantastic. I was at Georgetown, which was my dream school, and for a kid that was in foster care growing up, and basically being told that this was never going to be a possibility for you. Um, Being there was, the culmination of a lot of childhood dreams, and yet I found myself a semester away from graduating, and I suddenly realized that they were going to give me a piece of paper, and that piece of paper was somehow supposed to make my life okay. And my life wasn't okay. My brain wasn't okay. I wasn't happy. And I was actively self destructive. I was getting myself into incredibly dangerous situations with drug use, with sexual promiscuity. Um, and then my grandfather died, and he was a huge supporter for me, and a Korean vet, and we had a lot of commonality. And I found myself sitting at my computer in late December, and I'm holding the pistol, 38 Special, that he hand carved the grips for. It still has his initials in them, and I just decided that I'd had enough trauma. I decided that my deployment was done, and I had every inclination to end my life. And it's weird, and I think anybody that's dealt with suicidal thoughts or ideations, there's a strange sort of clarity and almost giddiness that happens once you finally decide that you're going to end your life. And I realized I was by myself in my room. I was renting out a room in a just a squalor filled apartment complex. I'm using these terms lightly. It was basically a room in a house. and every room in the house was rented to a different struggling person. But it was all I could afford. And, you know, I was sure I was done. And then I looked over at my dog. I had a dog at the time. We just lost him actually in October, sore spot. But I thought to myself, who's gonna feed my dog tomorrow? Like, who's gonna take care of him? That's really fucked up. I'm just gonna check out, and he's gonna be sitting here. And so I decided I was gonna make a plan at least to get my dog taken care of before I decided to kill myself. So I put the pistol away, and I thought to myself like, well, I'm gonna take care of my dog a bit and get him a home, and then we're good to go. And within that week of me sort of trying to figure out where I was going to put my dog, an organization reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to come out and with a group of veterans and do some service in LA to give back to underserved um, families in the Skid Row district in LA?" And for me, I just thought, free trip to LA, you might as well see that before you die. I mean, what's one more week? And so I went out there with like a light heart. Like I am sure that people thought I was perfectly fine. And that weekend sort of changed my life. I got into this service event, working at a place called the Dream Center on Skid Row, and um, I was on the third floor painting walls, like repainting walls. And the guy that was next to me, um, I don't know how he figured it out or what happened, but he just kept talking to me again and again to the point where it's kind of annoying me. And we left that day and we went to lunch. And sure enough, man, he sat right across from me. And then that led into the next morning. And then he's at breakfast with me. And I'm like, like I said, I'm starting to get kind of annoyed by it. I'm like, hey man, what's the deal? And as I look at him, I realize, his skin has kind of a yellow tinge to it, and I hadn't really seen that because of the lights in the place, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention to it because I was wrapped up in my own grief. And then he took a deep breath, and when he did, he held his breath at the end. And I looked at him and I was like, "Hey, are you in pain right now?" And he's like, "I'm in terrible pain right now." And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I have stage 4 cancer." And he'd already told me, parts of his whole life story up until this point, and it seemed like he was, living a life I could only dream of. He found the love of his life. He had 2 kids. He was an officer. He was handpicked by General Petraeus to be, this liaison for this high level thing. And so I look at him and I say, "What the hell are you doing talking to me? Why aren't you at home with your like family? That's like, I can't imagine why you'd want to be here." And he looked at me and he said a sentence that really changed my life. He said, "I don't choose how I die, but I choose every day how I live." And it shamed me, honestly. I was sitting there across from him, and here he is, like in pain with every breath. And I've got my hands, I've got my feet, I've got my eyes, and I'm squandering it. I'm gonna end everything. And so that was the first sort of change where I walked out of the darkness the first time. And for the next couple of years, I devoted myself to advocacy and service in the veteran sector. I worked at a well-known national nonprofit. I at one point I was managing like an 11-state region, and I got remarried. Um, my wife and I had a kid. Things seemed really good. And then in 2017, my wife got pregnant, found out on my birthday, with our second kid. And in February, she had a miscarriage. And that broke my entire world. I always had this idea when I was, whether I was deployed or anywhere I was in the world. I told you I was in foster care. I came from a broken family. I bounced around for a bit before I was adopted. I'm not, um, certainly don't have a perfect relationship with my adopted family. So when I built a family that was my own, um, I thought that I had come to an agreement with God that whatever happens to me, I can deal with, but protect my family. Um, and so when we lost our baby, it was this very personal very deep cut for me. And I had been researching for years since 2012. So about 5 years prior, I had been doing research on DMT and its analogs because the information that I saw seemed to suggest that it could do a couple pretty interesting things if you have PTSD. The first is that it has an anti-inflammatory property in your brain, and some of the studies for PTSD suggest that part of the reason that it's so exacerbated in the veteran community is because of inflammation in the cells of your brain itself. So I thought that there might be something worth looking into. And the other thing was that I had read was that PTSD degrades your DNA's ability to replicate itself, specifically the protein caps on the tip of your DNA that are called telomeres, that like fire the electricity between things, are degraded so they can no longer fire. And so these extreme entheogens were supposed to be able to either repair those caps outright or stimulate the birth of new neurons. This is all incredibly interesting research, but hard to replicate. It's all just theories at this point. Um, and so I had heard that ayahuasca could be a tool to do this, but after reading people's personal narratives, it just sounded terrifying. So, we have the miscarriage, and, I've got this information rolling in my head. And I've always sort of seen psychedelics as as tools to, like, personal analytic tools to be able to really go through parts of your brain or your thinking process and see them in a new light. So I got a hold of some LSD, and at this point I was a wreck. Like I couldn't do basic tasks. It was a chore to even get out of bed in the morning. I wasn't taking care of simple things as like brushing your teeth or bathing or wearing clean clothes, let alone the big things in my life that I was trying to accomplish. And I knew that I had to change something, so I got a hold of this LSD, and I cordoned myself off in a room, and I brought my journal with me. And what I found myself doing after a couple hours was trying to write my child's name again and again, the name that my wife and I had picked out for our kid. And to my horror, every time that I would start writing the first letter, I would invariably end up drawing a flat, straight line. And my mind kept connecting that to the EKG flat line. And I was getting more and more angry every time I tried to write it until I was literally just crying uncontrollably because I couldn't write our child's name, let alone bring our child back to life. And I had a real breaking moment where I realized, if I don't do something to change this, I'm not going to get out of this darkness. Like, I don't know that I even want to. And I found myself looking at my grandpa's pistol again. So I talked to my wife and I said, I'm going to buy a ticket to the Amazon rainforest and I'm going to go out in the jungle and try ayahuasca. And she was terrified. She's literally dealing with a miscarriage. And now her husband is taking off to the jungle. It's a really terrible situation. To this day, I believe if I hadn't done that, I probably would have killed myself. But I did. I went to Iquitos, Peru. I went to a shamanic workshop that I thought was reputable, but in retrospect, you don't know what you don't know. And I got myself some much needed healing through the ayahuasca therapy, but I felt like the entire situation was very dangerous and incredibly uncontrolled. To the point where even though I'd paid for 4 ceremonies and an additional 4 or 5 days of time at the center itself, I left after the third ceremony feeling like my soul might be at peril here. I don't feel safe. Despite all that, I came to terms with a couple very important parts of my journey, which is to say, like, my very traumatic childhood, um, and my relationship to post-traumatic stress. One of the things that I sort of had to feel in ceremony, and I know that, two things. First, I think that the medicine is a bit different for everybody. Even if it gives you the same, chemical signals, your own brain is going to map those signals differently based on your experiences, based on your definition of words, based on your expectations, based on your intentions. So for me, what it ended up being was a series of visions and experiential visions, meaning that one of the things I had to feel was what it was like to go out with me to dinner. I was basically sitting in my wife's head as like looking out her eyes. I couldn't affect her decision making, but I could just see how she saw life. And so we go out to a restaurant, and the first thing that she does when she walks in is immediately check all of the entrances and exits. And then once we get seated, she looks to see to make sure that my back is towards a wall. She's sure to tell the waiter that, don't come up from this side too quickly, or make sure that, this or that is taken care of. And what I realized in that was through her love, she had shouldered part of my burden, in her um, endeavor to make me more comfortable. She had to kind of look through my eyes at the things that would trigger me. And like most of my really transformative parts of my journey, there it was led by shame. I was really ashamed that she had any awareness of PTSD, or that I had somehow spread it to her, um, and that she had accepted it just out of love. And I made the decision then and there, in that very vision, that I wasn't going to allow that to be my reality anymore. I may be triggered by these situations, but how I reacted to those triggers, just like how that my friend said, I don't choose when I die, but I choose how I live. I realized that I was choosing how I reacted to these triggers. Whether I was making that a conscious decision or not was the thing I needed to sort of reevaluate. Um, and that moment, um, and I mean many many others that really reinforced that very same message, made me realize that I didn't want to continue reacting the way that I did. And now I feel like I have an additional moment all the time when something triggers me. I feel like instead of just immediately burning or immediately being angry, when I start to feel that well up, I have that second where I ask myself, do I want my wife or my daughter to carry this? And invariably, the answer is no. And that's been life changing. The second thing that was really affecting me up until that point was insomnia. I'd had insomnia for about 6 years. And anybody with insomnia can tell you that it is an increasingly corrosive disease. Um, at first, it's fairly manageable. I'm a little tired all the time. But after a few years of it, things that normally wouldn't even touch your radar become insufferable. Like, I have tinnitus. My left ear rings forever. It will ring forever. Um, that coupled with insomnia can, if you allow it, can affect your every moment, which absolutely affects your every day. Um, and one of the main reasons for my insomnia was I would have frequent terrifying dreams where I would be trapped, or I would be surrounded, or I would be directly under fire, or the mortars were coming down and I couldn't find a suitable shelter location. Um, it ranged from things I really experienced to things that would only happen in my worst possible nightmares. And those were manifest every time I closed my eyes. And when most people think about sleep, it's this time when they can rest, not this time where they have to actively go into battle again and again. Um, and it took me, I think, 3 ceremonies to really get to the heart of that, of being okay with not controlling everything, which is what I think the real genesis of those dreams was, when you're in a combat zone, whether you're in combat or not, the adrenaline is absolutely kicking all the time. And coming home and realizing that, the whole world is full of things you can't control, um, can leave you spinning. It left me spinning. It left me feeling hopeless, and it left me feeling powerless. And I regained some of my power simply through the realization that I don't have to control everything. It's totally fine. Um, I think one of the more formative experiences from that first set of ceremonies was maybe even the first actual vision that I had. A lot of people will talk about ego death, and that's a very weird sentence if you don't know what that is and you haven't experienced it. Um, your ego is who you are. It's how you identify yourself. It's the part that makes Wyly Gray Wyly Gray. It's all the words that I use to define myself, whether that's Marine or advocate or whatever I choose, father, husband. Um, and one of the first things that I had to feel, sort of the ticket for admission, as I like to say when I'm talking about it, was my death. And it started out in this really like interesting way. As the medicine sort of came on to me, immediately my vision changes. It's almost like you're teleported to a different place, a different plane of reality, even. And I realized that, in that place, I wasn't really a human anymore. I was like a fox, like a fully anthropomorphic fox. And I was in this green, beautiful, verdant, lush garden, and I was 100% in tune with everything around me. I could feel my ears on the top of my head as they would move towards sounds, and I found myself not just happy but like free in a way I couldn't even put into words. Um, and I'm mischievous, and I'm excited, and I'm happy, and I'm jumping around, and I'm playing, and and then over and across my field of vision, almost immediately are these webs, and they cross in front of me, and then they go over my whole body, and I can't move. And then every breath I take, like a boa constrictor, it gives the webs a little bit more tension. So I breathe in, then when I breathe out, they tighten. So now I can't breathe in as much the next breath. And I realize, like almost immediately, I can't get out. I'm going to suffocate and die. This is what is going to happen. It's a certainty, as certain as the sun is hot. Like there's no way out. And I absolutely panicked for a second. I absolutely panicked. I shook, and I did everything in my. I tried to bite at the bonds. But everything I did just tightened them more and more until I was literally like curled up on the ground. I couldn't even move my arms or my legs. Um, and I knew that the moment of death was coming. And it was the weirdest feeling. Um, I was, of course, afraid, right? I think that's a normal thing to feel. But more than that, I found myself saying out loud, well, you made it through Yemen, you made it through Bosnia, you made it through Afghanistan. I guess if you die on the floor in Peru, that's that. And then I started laughing, like I just at the ridiculous of it, like the ridiculousness of the situation, that I had, taken this upon myself to even come here was totally voluntary, and here I am dying because of it. Um, and then I just sort of accepted it. I was like, well, I guess that's that. And the second that I accepted it, everything blew apart. And I was in a new place, and I was feeling different visions, and that was really the start of that journey with ayahuasca. And now, when I think about death, it does not hold any of the sting. Like I realize I'm going to die. Everyone's going to die. Nobody makes it out of life alive. I mean, by definition. But that was probably the most terrifying way that I could think to die. Like I can't think of another situation more scary than a giant spider slowly taking your breath away before, ultimately devouring you, right? Um, and so now when I think of death, it's just kind of an inevitability, but the fear of it's completely gone. And that, I think, changed my relationship to my trauma outright, but also the insomnia. Like I realize now when these dreams are happening, like if this is it, that's it. You did your best. There's no like trapped or wounded animal aspect anymore, which I think was a very big part of it before.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, that's regardless of which entheogenic medicine you use and what trauma and whatever you're bringing to the equation, I think one of the largest lessons that seems to be common, or results that seems to be common from people that have a breakthrough experience like that, is a loss of fear of death, for whatever vision makes them have that, or feeling, or thought, or whatever.
You
um
typically have to die. I mean,
right, and
that's why you
it's
lose the
that,
fear.
yeah, it's that acceptance, like you said, you laughed and accepted it, and then you broke through it. And it's a thing we've talked about with like bad trips and stuff like that, is like being afraid of that and not accepting it, not walking through it, and then it just sits there and torments you, and that's like a lesson you have to learn from powerful psychedelic experiences. Is that the letting go, and um I it's the ego death, right? It's like, even if you still know who you are, it's like you letting go, and realizing that the ego is temporary. And when you let go of that, um and then learn that you were supposed to, uh I think that's where our spirit and our mind kind of combined, and clear out the stuff that can cause the trauma, the stuff you're hanging on to. When you let go of everything, you let go of that stuff too, and it makes it a little easier to integrate going forward. And it also makes you value life when you go through a death, whether it's symbolic through psychedelics or not. Um when you realize it was symbolic, uh you appreciate life so much more, and that just seems to be a general thing of all psychedelic users that have had a breakthrough like that, is like,
It's the price of the experience.
yeah. And
It's
then
the
they just,
price for the ticket.
and they and but the benefit of it is you value life so much more, and you don't want to waste time, and you want to improve yourself. And then the other thing, which it also shows up in you starting your organization, is people that go through that experience, they don't want to be like, well, that just happened to me, and be selfish about it. It's like you come out with a sense of like, I need to spread this this lesson with as many people as I can, uh it's a very tribal thing. you
Yeah,
know
well, I mean that really goes into. I mean, that was 2017, my first three experiences, and it took me 2 more years to get to where I needed to be, to where we are talking today, for example,
Mhm.
and a whole different set of experiences. I had said that I'd left that workshop center early. The third um, ceremony was, I mean, darker than anything I've ever experienced, and um, which I think would be an okay thing if it was being guided in a way that you could get through it. But I wasn't at a place where the ayahuasquero or the shaman, where he cared about the participants, or that he did the aftercare necessary, or that he made sure that you understood the messages or integrated them with you, or supported your own personal integration. This man was very much motivated by money, and by there's this almost dick measuring contest in the Amazon about who makes the strongest brew. And if you make the strongest brew and people talk about it, well, then you must be very powerful. So he had that component as well. And the thing that's interesting about ayahuasca is, it's opening you up to spirit. It's opening you up to a mysticism that in the West we have done a very thorough job of disconnecting ourselves from. If you talk to the indigenous Shipibo people, they think it's crazy, a lot of them, that we come down to the Amazon to reconnect with spirit. They see it as a medicine for physical ills, for things that are happening in their body specifically. And I think the thing that they're missing is that I think the greatest ill in the West we have is that we have disconnected from spirit completely. And we like to have an intermediary. We like to put a priest in front of us that he talks to God for us. We like to have, um, a very solid pyramid structure in place where we are not the one on top. We like to follow and not to lead, I guess, in some ways. And I think that when you really reconnect and you realize that these experiences, especially if they're done, psychedelic set and setting is incredibly important. Anybody that's even a novice understands that word or those series of words. But I think preparation and reverence are just as important. I think understanding what you're walking into, understanding what's going to be expected of you, how you can maneuver in that space, and having a fundamental understanding that you're not doing it alone are necessary to have the best possible outcomes in terms of long-term healing. I didn't have that in my first three ceremonies. And to say I was hesitant to go back, I think would be an incredible understatement. Um, when I went for my last four ceremonies in um, April of last year, um, I went in understanding that I'd cut my journey short the first time and that I still had some work to do. I felt like it in my soul. I felt in my spirit that, I'd had a tremendous amount of healing, but there was still work to do. Um, and in the first ceremony, I feel like in a lot of ways I was just cleaning up the dark energy or the bad experiences from the first three, and then for the for the fifth ceremony on, so fifth, sixth, and seventh, it was back to kind of working on these core pieces of me that needed to still be addressed. And um, even though I'd experienced that ego death or that breakthrough, like you said, um, I live here on the East Coast. I'm a few minutes outside of Washington, D.C. Spiritually, this might be one of the loudest places on the planet to live in terms of sound drowning out your connection. And it's very power and money based out here. It's very much credibility is everything. And I spent, like I said, 7 years or so building my credibility. And as much as I wanted to help veterans and help my tribe, I wasn't willing, at least at the time, to sacrifice my credibility to do it because of the stigma attached. And it was really beautiful. The last three ceremonies I had were um, not dark in any way, absolutely filled with light and abundance and love and acceptance. And I think I tried to explain to my wife. She's very Catholic, and some of this stuff, especially mysticism, can sound downright weird or off for her. But having her support, is incredibly important to me. So I've tried very hard to explain to her, this is where I'm coming from. This is what I felt. This is what's happening. And I try to couch that not just in the mystic part of it, but in the science as well. I think that my brain is such that I've always been really attracted to the mysticism that's available in the world, but it needs to come from a place that also has, a basis in reality as I understand it. So, I tried to explain to my wife, how I felt. And the best way I can tell you is uh, on my very last ceremony, I felt like I'd sort of peeled the onion as far as I needed to at that point. And yet there were a couple messages that I felt like I needed to understand. And so I got three distinct visions, one right after the other. And the first one was a bit goofy, to be honest. It was like this field of flowers. I lived in Texas a few times in my life, and the bluebells there are just this beautiful, short, blue, gorgeous flower that grows with lots of other bluebells around it. It's never by itself. It's always in an entire field usually, and the sun comes up over the horizon and then it zooms into this one on the edge, and I could feel myself in it like I was that bluebell. And it looks up at the sun, and then it looks away almost at the field of view that I'm seeing it, like, kind of top down. And it looks up at me, and it says to me very clearly, I don't want to be a flower. And I looked at it sitting there with all the other flowers, and I thought, how ridiculous that this one flower doesn't want to be what it is. And I realized at that moment, that's me. I have parts of me that these are just who I am. And why am I denying my purpose? And my purpose is clearly to help people find healing, to help them find safe and effective means to find accessible healing. So I started laughing. And then, I had this moment where I felt like of expectation, where ayahuasca was kind of asking me, like, what do you do with this information? Are you going to take it back? Are you going to really use it? Or are you going to go another 2 years and then come back because you're out of balance again? And I sort of said, yeah, I'm gonna do something with this, but I didn't mean it all the way. And one of the things that I think anyone that's done one of these very powerful plant teachers, these plant medicines, is you can't bullshit the medicine, because the medicine's reflecting you in a lot of ways. And you can't bullshit yourself either. You can tell yourself lies, but they don't hold water. So it immediately shot me into this next vision where I'm sitting around this ceremonial sacred place where we're taking ayahuasca, and to my right and left and in front of me are three other veterans. And I know two of these veterans. I know them, like, from my own life. I know who they are, and they're people that have struggled with reintegration and personal trauma for as long as I've known them. That's how I met them in the first place. And they're both laughing, like they're smiling and happy and laughing in a way I've never seen them before. And I realized in that moment that the reason they were there was because I had brought them there, and that they wouldn't have had this experience otherwise. And that was when it broke. That was when the shame hit me. And I thought of my wife, and I thought of my daughter, and I thought, what kind of a, like, husband, or what kind of a father are you if you're afraid, due to the stigma or due to the loss of your credibility, to bring medicine back to people that need medicine? And I started crying, like, from my soul. I started crying. I wept bitter tears for the time that I had wasted. And I made it my reality from that moment forward. I said, I'm going to change everything, even if it costs everything. I'm going to change to make sure that these guys have this opportunity. And here I am, I'm almost a year later. And those two guys that I saw were the two guys that I reached out to at the very beginning, before I even had a curriculum developed, before there was a fellowship, before any of the, very integral parts of this process were developed. All I had was this idea that I needed to help my friends. I needed to give them access. And I called them, each one. And immediately, one of the guys said, I've been waiting for this call. I'm absolutely on board. Didn't even want to hear the explanation. Just, I'm ready to go. Tell me when we're leaving. I'm ready to go. And the final sort of thing that I had seen in my ceremonies was my frustration at having to sort of go it alone. Frequently in my life, I've been the first responder to either accidents or terrible things that have happened around me. And I find that I'm the one that runs towards that thing to triage people. And that's really the impetus of, I don't want to be a flower. I felt like I always had to do that alone. And one of the things I felt, I screamed at the darkness, was like, why am I alone? Like, I'm going to do this because this is part of me and I want to help people. But why do I have to do it alone? And the response back was, when you're ready, your tribe will come. Um, and we're at that point now where I'm at a position where I'm ready to lead, I hope, in a way that is both meaningful and effective, but ultimately in one way that's truthful to the ground that I've walked, that allows others to follow in a meaningful way for their own journey. I feel like in a lot of ways I've sort of done the dark recon. Like I went out on my own, I went to the jungle, I had these dangerous experiences. But what I realized in the end was that it helped me see what to look out for, firstly, in the places that, we use. But more importantly, it allowed me to see the trauma that I was carrying and how that can be seen by others, one, and how it will allow me to see the trauma in others if I only open my eyes. And if you're a doctor or anybody in the healing, I think vocations, it's really important to be able to see the symptomology of the thing you're trying to treat. And what I realized is the thing I'm trying to treat is this really um, multifaceted problem called suicide, right? And that's really just the expression of the symptoms. But what we really need to treat is the underlying trauma. And to be able to do that in an honest way and to be able to approach it in an honest way, I think is the challenge. That's what I've tried to do every step of the way. Is what wasn't there that I needed when I went through these first experiences? What do I wish was there that would have helped me? And that's what I've tried to create every step of the way.
Yeah, man, it's amazing. I'm so grateful that you had the healing and the experience, um and that you're able to talk about it so powerfully, and Joel as well, like his story, which is different than yours, but still just as powerful, and left with that same thing, that you want to spread that love, and help other people have that healing. And so I'm so grateful that you guys have hooked up, and are able to tell your story, and help other people, and build this thing. It's it's just amazing. um one last thing I wanted to get into is, to your focus is with soldiers, and their PTSD. But what we're going through in the world right now with the coronavirus, and you know government financial collapse that's all happening, and all of the tension, and things happening, every day you wake up to a new reality. I think going forward, like, we're PTSD is going to be a very common thing in people that weren't in the military, and it will go undiagnosed in a lot of people, and there will be the whole spectrum of symptoms of it seen throughout our culture going forward. And I think that the situation will rise where plant medicines and entheogens, um being used to heal the same way. um do you see going forward that that's going to be a positive change in our culture, especially in America, but worldwide, of acceptance of using entheogens to clear up this trauma? um I mean, do you
And to connect,
huh
and to connect.
yeah, and to reconnect to each other, and form the same stuff that
Lasting bonds.
yeah, yeah, because we're all going through it together. um
I think that this has opened up some really interesting realities for a lot of people. I think that, if we're talking about specifically the coronavirus, or right now, I mean, if you're playing apocalypse bingo, I mean, there's 24,000 kilometers squared plague of locusts ravaging Africa. There are um, earthquakes every day. Last year, the Antarctic was literally on fire. You can't make these things up. We're living in a time of great upheaval, and I don't think that it's a coincidence that we're finding that plants and their shared consciousness have something to tell us. And ultimately, I started this conversation with, I speak to veterans because that's who I know. I advocate for entheogens and plant and fungi medicines worldwide. I can't possibly undersell how important our reconnection to nature, and to really what I personally believe is our birthright as humans, is the connectivity to this very living planet. And one thing I would really like to say, whether you're a veteran or not, um, you don't have to be alone anymore. This Veterans of War is an organization that's pointed towards veterans. But if you are hearing this podcast and you are struggling, reach out to me. I may not be able to help you directly, but I absolutely know somebody that can. Of that, I am sure. You don't have to be alone. And this trauma that you're feeling, you're not the first person to feel it. And you can come back into the light out of it. Specifically for veterans, if you're looking to find your tribe, I'm building it. Contact me. If you're still in the darkness, we've been on that journey at Veterans of War. Come and find us, and let's craft a journey that makes sense for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna see, so many people searching for answers and their tribe, like you're saying, that there's gonna be 501(c)(3)s that pop up, focused towards every different group, that's looking for each other,
Great.
and
I can't wait to see it. I
yeah,
think that this renaissance of spirit is very much in the making.
yeah,
And I think that there's a psychedelic renaissance that's happening in tandem.
yeah,
And I personally believe that this coming um, these coming changes, I don't know that we can overcome them if we don't come to a sense of understanding of how to interact appropriately with this environment that we cohabitate.
yeah,
Um, and as I said also from the beginning, I think humans are tribal by nature. I don't see black, white, or all these different variations. All I see is branches all coming from the same tree. And it's so important that we make sure that all of our branches are doing all right,
yeah,
because the health of the tree is at stake.
yeah, yeah, and I think too, a big um influence in that coming out of the situation around the world right now is, in times like now, everyone always looks to the government's going to get us out of this, in America where everyone's the economy's okay because we're all going to get $1,200 or whatever. And, but I think every, every hurdle that comes our way with the coronavirus pandemic, uh, almost every government has been fumbling the ball. And I think like as that goes on over the next year, I think people are going to be like, wait, the government's not here. I'm on my own, I got to get myself through this. But I think, definitely like we are saying about psychedelics and wanting to create and reach out and all these things.
They're conscious.
Yeah,
I really believe it.
they're going to spread the message of like we have to do this on our own, but we're all doing this on our own together, and
Right.
that like and it'll create smaller community and people will be able to get through this and grow from it. And I think that everyone that's just waiting for someone else to do it for them is just
The
gonna,
answers were in you all the time.
yeah, yeah, and I think,
That's one of the fundamental, I think, teachings of any of the master teacher plants
yeah,
is the answers were always with you.
yeah,
You just weren't listening.
yeah. Also the things that you're afraid of are all con- constructs of your mind, like
Right.
like self-doubt and depression and anxiety. It's like you're doing that to yourself. That's why you're in your own way.
What's the old adage? I think there was this coming to memory is that story where the boy is talking to his grandfather and he says, how do I live a good life? And the grandfather says, well, inside of you, there are two wolves, one that's vicious and angry and tries to devour everything, and one that's subservient and part of the pack that knows his place and knows how to interact. And he says, how do I know who will win? And the grandfather says, it's who you feed.
Yeah, a very similar quote that I can't remember who said it. I know that I heard it through Bill Hicks, but it's that, we all have two sets of eyes. We have the eyes of fear and the eyes of love,
Exactly.
and it's, I mean, it's been a big part of me and I've, psychedelics have helped, meditation has helped, our Discord community from this podcast that we've created has helped, but it's like, and it comes down to optimism and pessimism, I guess, too. But it's like every situation when I feel myself getting emotionally, taken down and being fearful or jealous or hateful, any of these negative emotions, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm seeing the world through the wrong set of eyes. Let me, take a step back and be aware of that and switch, and the world completely changes, when you just change the eyes you're looking through.
Yeah, I think that humans have an incredible ability towards magnetism or self-realization, and um, whether it's that's the wolf you feed, or what it comes down to in the end is that dichotomy between love and fear.
Yeah.
And if you choose love, if you actively remember when things are getting tough to choose love, you will be surprised at how beautiful life can respond.
Yeah.
I fundamentally, one of the reasons, you talked about, Joel being a part of this now. One of the reasons that Joel is because I think that one of the things that I've found to be very true is, um, if you plant a community garden and you in earnest let other people plant their seeds where they think they're necessary, I think you'll always be surprised at how beautiful that garden grows.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do with Veterans of War, is plant seeds of consciousness that are receptive to change, that are receptive to love, that understand that they're choosing their own reality, and in a lot of ways they're choosing their own responses to that reality too. And we're all reflections of one another. We are all just these single slices of consciousness floating about, trying to make sense of it all. And when you realize that the other person on the other side of the conversation is simply another version of that, it becomes a lot easier to see where they're coming from and to react with acceptance, humility, and grace. And I try that. I actively, mindfully try to love the people that I interact with. Sometimes that's harder than others,
Yeah.
but I'm still human. Um, it's still a journey, even for me. I've got a long way to go.
Yeah. I mean, and we all do, but it's like, as long as we have that perspective, we're always going forward, and that's why I love the psychedelic community so much. Regardless of um if it's a, like I said, like an organization, focusing on specific parts of society like veterans or just society as a whole, it's the psychedelic community wants to make things better, wants to grow, wants to heal, wants to move forward. And I think, like you said, the psychedelic renaissance is growing, and I really think through organizations like yours and maps and stuff like that, uh it's, we've got a critical mass going on, at least in the United States. And uh every year it seems like there's another ayahuasca church in the states that I hear about, or y- y- more and more videos pop up about growing your own psilocybin mushrooms or hunting for wild psilocybin, just more and more people just getting on the train. And I really think, in before we know it, organizations like yours aren't going to need to fly to Peru, unless that you want the kind of going into the jungle, um traditional
We
ceremony
have
type of.
jungles here.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the thing. We have our indigenous forests, and that's an interesting point that you bring up. Honestly, Ruben, is it's crazy that I have to go to Peru. It's wild to me that we do have indigenous people here. They're called Native Americans, and there's lots of tribes that have a plant medicine background. The San Pedro cactus is widely revered all over North and South America, and it's a huge part of the Native American tradition.
yeah,
Um, we
yeah,
just need to rediscover it.
yeah. And I really think that's going to happen. Uh, more and more, and like I said, it's just, it's a snowball rolling downhill that I I just don't know how fast it's rolling, but I know nothing can stop it.
I'll tell you, it's rolling as fast as it needs to.
Yeah.
I think that the only thing that I can say with a lot of certainty right now, other than, I think psychedelics are obviously a benefit to humanity, is that no one's ever late
Yeah.
for anything. You're working precisely within the strictures of the divine mechanisms of nature.
Yeah.
And you're right on time.
Yep. Yeah. It's never too late. Well, we're at an hour and a half. I don't want to keep you too long. And I definitely would love to have you back on and keep up with the progress and even expand more on ideas and stuff sometime. But so how can people help your organization? And we'll include a link and everything, but how can people help you?
Well, if you or somebody you know is suffering from the after effects or the invisible scars of war, contact us. If that's not a reality for you and you just want to support us, go to veteransofwar.org/donate. Every donation goes directly into healing veterans. Nobody on my staff draws pay. We are not paying ourselves a nickel for the work we do. We do it for the love of the healing that we're trying to help facilitate access to. We have a real problem in the world today where we're disconnected, and Veterans of War is literally on the tip of the spear trying to help people reconnect. So donations, word of mouth, and ultimately, if you think you have a skill set that would benefit us, hop on the website, shoot us an email. I'd love to start a dialogue with anybody that thinks that that needs to happen.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah. So thanks again for coming on, and we'll definitely keep in touch and be watching your progress.
Ruben and Stan, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
As always, thank you for listening to the Help Find the Others podcast. Please don't forget to check out our Discord server to connect with our growing community. The link to join can be found in the description. And if you feel like donating to our channel to help us grow, a link to our Patreon can also be found in the description, as well as some cryptocurrency wallet addresses. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast or have any questions about these topics, please email helpfindtheothers@protonmail.com. If you would like to leave a voicemail or a text message question for a future episode, Stan, what's that number again?
567-233-1335.
Okay, guys, thanks again. And until next time, let's help find the others.